piracy in this particular example, since we're mostly talking about film. But so it really starts with the pirates getting their hands on a copy of the film. And that happens typically one of three ways. Either pirates go into a theater with a camera very similar to that and shoot it literally right off the screen, right? Just like what you're doing. Or it's a rip from retail product, meaning you've probably streeted it or you're close to street. Or it's a compromise of an inside copy. Since a lot of you are in post, right, you've also got stuff that's traveling through your hands. But that also could be screeners and a bunch of other stuff, right? But one of those three happens, and the response from the industry is to try to prevent that from happening, right? If you can prevent it from getting out, you don't really have a problem, right? So certainly if you could contain it there, it'd be good. You also have two big pirate ecosystems, an electronic ecosystem and a physical ecosystem, and those are pretty robust. And anybody that's been in the space knows some of those logos or names, Pirate Bay or Mega Video, which is a streaming site. There's also all the physical stuff. And you can kind of disrupt that, but again, they're very robust. And then I come over here and say non-monetized consumption. It's not kind of pirates anymore, because again, I'm going to change your mindset and say, but at the end of the day, the people that are consuming it are consumers, right? They're maybe short of customers because they may not be paying you money, but they are your customers. They are not thieves, pirates, or others, right? So from a business standpoint, you need to look at that as demand that you created. They want your product, and now you've got to figure out kind of how to get there, right? So we'll call it non-monetized consumption. And the idea here is, how do I respond at a business level? How do I respond to that? So I'll teach you a couple things about piracy. So one thing is piracy is a global issue, but it really has local or at least market level stuff. So there's certain markets that contribute to source piracy. I know you can't read that, but these are markets where stuff gets out of, right? So where does the pirate copies come from? It comes from typically certain markets. And usually those markets are markets that we'd call early markets, right? They might have been traditionally early, or they might be early because the studios are trying to build businesses, like the Ukraine, right? Boy, what am I telling you? I'm telling you that if you put your film there, it is going to come out of there, right? It's that simple, right? A lot of law in Ukraine? Not really, right? There is no law against camcording off of a screen in the Ukraine, right? So as a filmmaker or producer, you go, well, I'm going to distribute there. Can't you stop those camcorders? No. It is legal, right? So don't put your film there, right? At least first, right? Don't go first, right? There's other markets that contribute to the distribution of the content. So it gets out of this country, but then maybe this country, like Thailand, contributes to a whole bunch of those physical DVDs getting made there and then distributed all over the world, right? And then there's markets that have local piracy. So that's really contained within the borders, and that's really a different thing. We kind of battle that market by market. All right, so ultimately it led me, years in this space and hearing all these discussions with the business led me to the 10 great myths, right? So the first one is piracy is inevitable. I hear this from media executives over and over and over again is, I do what I do because piracy is inevitable, so whatever I do, it's going to happen. Yes. It's not really that it's inevitable, but the real question is, are you telling me that you can't do anything about it? Like, whatever you do doesn't affect whatever they do. No, there's a direct linkage there. You can affect piracy a lot. Is it still going to happen? Absolutely. But how it happens and what the ultimate quality to the market is affected a lot. Quality makes no difference to pirates. Depends, right? They want a good product. In some cases, they have to have a good product, but they have to have a product, right? Impossible to compete with free. I'm going to talk a fair amount about this a little bit later, but the real interesting thing is all those consumers, people downloading it, most of the time it's not about free. Right? It's just really not about free, right? So quit thinking you're competing with free because it's not about free. It's about other things. Availability, timing, right? Windows, we'd call it in the business, right? So again, there's a lot of things that when you start to get close to the people that are downloading and do a lot of research, you figure out what their motivations are. Once a pirate, always a pirate. Save that one, because right now you're already thinking, well, I'm either a good customer or I'm a disloyal pirate, right? Could I be both, right? All the pirates need is one copy. Yeah, they really need one good copy. If you give them a crappy copy, they still run with it, interestingly enough. Going early, meaning windowing early, effectively competes with pirates. Not necessarily, because it depends where you're going, right? So I have to go early in Russia because I'm trying to build that market. And they're going to get it anyway, and quality doesn't matter, and right, you start rolling these things together, you can see why we wind up with what we wind up with. Can't wait for optimized timing in major markets. We'll talk about that. I can limit piracy distribution by limiting my languages. So I'll only come out with that early DVD in Russia, and I'll only put Russian on it. Okay, makes kind of sense if you just thought the pirates stayed, contained to Russia, right? Box office is strong, so piracy impact must be overstated. Richard, you're wrong, right? I'm still kicking ass on theatrical. I already told you that 2/3 of your impact or more is on your home entertainment. So yes, your theatrical is still going to feel okay. It's not going to feel as good as it did, but you're still going to think you're doing okay. But what is going on with home entertainment, right? It's getting heavily impacted. But piracy's killed the DVD business. Boy, I don't want to take all the blame for the lack of DVD business because that isn't the primary reason why people aren't buying DVDs, right? So, again, once you know what people are doing. So let's stop and address this limit languages right here. So let me just show you kind of what happens. So I'm going to play a couple clips of the Disney movie Cars.
Hé, petit, t'as peur de rien comme coureur.
Ah, salut, Monsieur le King.
Toi, t'as plus de
All
talent.
right, so a couple things about that. So one is that is a camcorder off of the screen, right? Okay, so for any of you out there that say, boy, that piracy stuff isn't any good, don't want people download it, whatever, you go, okay, what if I told you that was the VHS master or almost the DVD master, right? That's a cam off of a screen, right? So it says how good this could be. Now, it's not always that good, right? But for those that kind of are in this space, you'd say, yeah, commonly stuff is pretty good, especially more and more today, because if you put it in the Ukraine, they're really good at shooting it off the screen. That didn't come from the Ukraine. Anybody have an idea where that came from? It's French. Oh, okay. So we got a couple knowledgeable people here. So, the DCVI guys are here, right? So it's French, Canadian, Montreal, right? Because France is usually later, but guess what? Most studios go day and date in Canada, so the pirates aren't stupid. They go up there where laws are lax and things are a little easier, and they get really good at shooting it off the screen and capturing the audio, and that was French, Canadian, right? And I know that it came from French, Canada, Montreal, not because of the audio, but because we have forensic marks in there that trace to the theater, right? So it says every print in every theater are individually marked, so we can trace them right back to there. So I know that this visual absolutely came from that theater, right?
Hey, buddy, you're one gutsy racer.
Oh, hey, Mr. the King.
You got more
All
time.
right, so what do you think this is? Got English on it now, right? Where do you think it came from? Where did the visual come from? Same place, French, Canadian, Montreal, right? The pirates are taking the same visual, and they're taking a different DCVI track that was made. This one happens to be the domestic track. They went and got it from a different theater, right, in high quality, and now they're doing dubbing the same way that we as an industry do dubbing with our dubs, okay? They do a good job of it, right? This was out about 24 hours behind the French-Canadian version. And then what we see...
I'm Mia. I'm Tia. We're like your biggest fans. Catch out!
I love being me.
All right, so now I've still got English, but I've got Spanish subtitles, and of course, you know these were put on by the pirates because they do things that we in post would never do, like break the edge of the frame and rules like that. But now we've got pirates doing their own subtitling on top of an English track, and this is again available just hours after the other ones. So usually within 24 to 48 hours, I've got English, French, and Spanish, the three major markets of the entire world covered. Right? And so it gives you a sense of how robust and how organized they are in terms of the ability to acquire our stuff at good enough quality or better, right? And be able to localize it to the big markets of the world. Now, let me show you one thing that occasionally, interestingly, happens.
Crazy grandpa car. What an idiot. Turn right to go left.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need Marcia and Ron Barnes to come up and get their child up at the concession stand. Thank you.
Pretty odd, right? So that's the English track that I showed you earlier. It just happens to be in a different part of the movie. And so, the pirates went and grabbed the audio from a place where it just happens that there was this anomaly that went on in the audio track, right? So we put two and two together, you go, that is a drive-in. Right? Concession stand isn't, it's not, normally people aren't letting their kids wander around in a theater kind of, no one calls it the concession stand, right? That's drive-in. But interestingly enough, we were never able to figure out which drive-in. We think we know, right? But again, this is part of kind of this, with perfect forensics in terms of a unique anomaly, but we could never find a drive-in where the manager remembered actually doing a PA call like that. Right over the same audio system that they're broadcasting on. Right? So occasionally we get lucky, and then we actually get unlucky because we couldn't figure it out. Okay, so having built Disney's Anti-Piracy team for the last 6 years, and then having left in April, it allowed me to really digest what we did at Disney. We were probably held as one of the best in the world at this kind of space, into three major things. Right? So really these building blocks. The first thing you need to be able to do is do some foundational stuff, right? How to defend against their strengths. I'm talking about the pirates, right? How to defend against their strengths, how they're exploiting you. So the pirates are really good about exploiting the nuances of our business. So what it hopefully builds in you is understanding risk management, legal and technical leverage. So there's a bunch of things that you can do. But this is what most of the industry does exclusively. It's just that. And I'm going to show you that this isn't nearly enough. Then on top of that, you can build what I'm calling advanced stuff. So the key here is enhanced profitability. It's all about show business, right? The business side. You enhance your profitability by making better business decisions, right? Don't go put your film first in the Ukraine, right? Or Russia, I'll say that too, right? You're already smarter than when you came in here. Right? All right, better business decisions, right? And then on top of that, you can actually get to a point where I think there's business insight here. Insight, as I define it, is what you didn't know, right? There's things I'm going to show you shortly that I think you didn't know, right? And so this is about responding to those pirate consumers, again, in ways that you didn't understand and beginning to deal with them as consumers and customers. So if we drop down to that foundational stuff, hopefully you've got some sense of risk management. We've heard it talked a little bit about here, but it's essentially, do you know where your risks are? This happens to be how we, within Disney, my team tracked things in terms of where are the leaks. So there's your production work cycle running across the top, and it just says, script development, yes, you could maybe have a risk there, but in general, pirate scripts are, unless it's Star Wars or something, doesn't really mean anything to anybody. But if we talked, word screeners, now I got a problem, right? And so where stuff is coming from, right? So if you do things like forensically mark it, you do, right? So we mark everything. Everything is about as broad as you can. And so that way, when it pops out somewhere, you can go, that was the one we sent to you, right? And so we can figure that out, right? Policies and procedures, well, to me, I always hated this, but it's a case where what are the rules, what are the handling, and what's acceptable and not acceptable? Little things, I mean, again, within an industry, we tend to be really light on this stuff, and to me, I hate this kind of stuff in terms of rules, but one of the most important, like in this media shipping and handling stuff, is if I give you a copy of something, right, so you're going to carry a DVD of something early to Japan to show it. What's acceptable, right? Little things like, do I put it in the hotel safe, right? Do I carry it with me on the plane or do I put it in my baggage? Right? Little things like that make all the difference because you would be surprised how when we lose something, when you start asking the questions, how crazy some of the answers are. Right? Well, of course I put it in my luggage because I didn't want to carry it with me. Wait, but your luggage isn't with you, right? How often is your luggage rifled through, right? Quite often, actually, or lost or whatever. So there's a whole bunch of just best practices you can do. So another thing is knowing what really happened, right? You start putting all this together, and pretty soon, again, you can deconstruct things after the fact. So let's take a look at WALL-E, the movie. I'm going to show you what really happened. What we've got is kind of three swim lanes here. So the top one is what happened on the internet, what was available piracy-wise on the internet. The middle one is where it came from, right, was the actual source. And this is the hard goods side of things. Timeline across the top. Theatrical opening is here. DVD, First Street is down there. And those blocks happen to be where the markets were, when they opened. So the first copy that we found out there was a copy that was a cam off of a screen in Florida. I'll play that for you so you get a sense of what this was like. And that's pirate subtitles, by the way. They were playing with us a little bit. All right, so let me just pull the audio down. All right, so you get a sense that if I left this up here for 2 hours, that'd be like torture, right? This is not very good. It's very, very hard to watch. And so the pirates did a pretty bad job here, right? So compared to that version of Cars I showed you, this one's pretty crappy. And if that was the only thing that was out there, we'd win, right? Because again, if you're into the downloading scene or you're going to the swap meet buying those things, I don't care how many people are selling DVDs of WALL-E if they look like that, right? Because if you're willing to watch that, you're not going to go to the theater or pay, $19 or whatever for a DVD, right? You're just not in the real market. Unfortunately, right behind it, we've got a version that came out. Anybody can read that? The Ukraine. Don't put your film in the Ukraine because it's going to get canned, right? Yeah. Guess what? Cam, right? How good do you think it is? Pretty good. Opens with a splash screen, right? So it already looks real, right? It doesn't start in the middle. It's not crooked. It's got everything on here, right? So good enough? I know it's good enough. You know why? Because if I left this up here, you'd forget I'm here. Right? Doesn't matter what you tell me. I can just watch you, and your body language tells me this is good enough. Even if you go, man, I'm a golden eye for the studio, and I don't buy into any, piracy crap, right? You're going to watch that, right? And so this is, about trying to figure out where the threshold is, and that's certainly good enough. If I played any of it, you'd notice this is English audio, right? But I said Ukraine, right? Now, if you're really paying attention, when I start playing the splash screen, there was no audio, and then all of a sudden, boom, it kicked right in. That's because the pirates went and got English from somewhere else, right? And then striped that onto the Ukrainian. So they done the dub there. But, as of about day 6, we had that out there, right? So that's a problem, right? Then right behind that, we had one from a cam from Poland, actually out about day 30. That happened to be a manager of a theater, so it didn't take too long to kind of figure that out. I can go round that guy up. Then domestic TV marketing screener. So this is one of those industry kind of inside copies. Happened to go to an executive at one of the TV networks that's a buyer. Some reason as a industry we seem to think that the top executive of a TV network absolutely, positively had to get a copy of Wall-E or he didn't know what it was and he would never buy it. Right? As opposed to saying, if you really have to see it, just call us. I'm sure we will screen it for you, being that you're one of the top executives of a TV network. Right? Instead, we send a DVD over there. And this one happened to come out. Happened to be, of course, marked individually so we knew it was the copy that we sent literally to him or his office. So what we've got going on here is we've got time code running in the upper right, and this used to say property of ABC Domestic Television. The pirates used a kind of a masking, I don't know why you just didn't leave it, right? It's not gone. Crop it off or something, for God's sake. But this is what they did. So it's pretty obvious that that hopefully this wasn't, people didn't think this was real, right? It's not like we would put something out like that. But that's what was out there. But I'm going to show you another version of it. So this is the same original. Different piracy group used a different transparent mask technique on it and did it right. And so the property of is still down here. The time code's still running up here. But it's almost gone. Right? Not totally. It kind of looks like water or something on there. But it's gone enough that the majority of the people that are not in this business don't even notice it. Right? My wife doesn't notice it. And so it's perfect for most people's sake. So what's the key message of this? Anybody? Visual watermarking does not work. Right? So anybody that says, oh, I'm going to put a visual watermark on there or whatever, you say, no, this is, I can obscure it easily. I could always crop it out too. So anytime you put a visual watermark in, you have to put something that's also a covert mark that they wouldn't find. And then we had the DVD, retail DVDs compromised, and then we had the Blu-rays compromised. And remember the street dates back here. So why am I showing you this? So a couple different reasons. One is every copy in the entire world came from these 10 sources. Right? Only 10. Only 10. Only 3 cams, right? 1 oops, and some retail rips down here. So these are going to happen. Hopefully you can move them as close to street date as you can. Hopefully you don't have any more of these marketing screeners get out, at least from that particular guy's office. And these cams, you can focus, but one of the messages is if you go into the Ukraine early, it's going to happen. If you go into the Ukraine later, it's going to move it back, or you can have an opportunity to deal with it, right? So it starts to contain your perspective on at least source piracy and what's going on. I'll show you a couple other charts. This is a chart that's measuring actual peer-to-peer downloads. So if you guys go into BitTorrent or eDonkey or whatever, no, you're not anonymous, right? You can be watched and measured. And this is done by a third-party company that watches all the completed downloads. So I don't care as a business guy how many people started a download of Wall-E. I only care when you get the whole thing, right? Because the whole thing is the first thing that competes with the real product. This is a complicated way to look at it, but we've got 9 million completed downloads, right? Now let me cut it a couple other different ways. So by market, you notice that almost 40% of the total downloads in the world came from Spain, Italy, and France, right? So you got 3 markets that contribute very significantly. Are those pretty strong markets for us as an industry right now? No, they're getting hammered, right? They're getting just hammered, especially in home entertainment, right? They're just collapsing markets in terms of home entertainment. And you wonder why, because these guys are downloading a lot of stuff. US is typically over here at about 5%. So US is not where we have a problem, right? We have a problem in the other mature markets especially. Here's a different way to cut it. This is looking at it by version or by source, right? So I played a bunch of these. So here's that Florida cam that was really crappy. So you see it came out, started to get downloaded. People said, oh, this is crap. Right behind it, here's that Ukrainian cam. You see it did much better. You see their Poland cam hardly got anything. Then that DVD screener did much better right there. And then we've got the DVD rips and we got the Blu-ray rips, that little orange right there, right? So, but again, the DVD rips and the Blu-ray rips are perfect, right? Perfect. In the early days, they did transcodes though, because we used to put Blu-ray out with MPEG-2, and they said, screw that, we're not moving 30 gigs of data around, we'll just do H.264 transcode, and then we'll move 2 gigs around, and it'll still be pretty much just as good, right? And so, again, these guys are not, they're not stupid, they're pretty technology savvy, but there gives you a sense of what happened. We can also cut this same data by market. So now I'm cutting it by version, by market. So this is the US only. So these are people, if you downloaded Wall-E, you're in here, right? And this shows you, there's the theatrical release, here's the DVD back here. And so it shows that, people that wanted it during the theatrical run, this is when they were downloading it, and then you really see pretty much, low, and then it spikes up over here, right? Close to the DVD. When did marketing turn on? Right here, right? This is looking at Italy. Interestingly enough, Italians don't like audio in any language primarily but Italian, right? So that's why, even though versions were available, the Italian version got added to a version right there, right? And all of a sudden, boom, and it happens to be sitting kind of, there's your theatrical, right? So one of the challenges with Italy is when they went really late with theatrical, the people that did download in Italy, and there was a lot of them, got a product that was really good, right? Some other things, we saw 1.3 million completed downloads in Italy. There were only 800,000 theatrical tickets sold. That gives you a sense of how strong the downloaders are there. This is giving you a different insight. So this happens to be a movie that one of the major studios chose to release about 4 months delayed in the UK. And it's a movie that was a major movie. The reason they delayed it was they wanted to hit a holiday window, right? So a lot of times that's the primary driver. And the real debate within the studio was, if you're going to wait for 4 months, piracy is just going to kill this movie. My point of view is, no one knows about the movie and there's no demand for the movie until you turn the marketing on, right? When you turn the marketing on, you create demand, and demand goes either into the box office if you can, if you have it there, or goes online if that's the only place they can get it. And so you see that it spiked very, low here. So that was basically, kind of the pirate world. And then you see nothing. We've got medium compromise, so people kind of tracking it. And then here's when they started their marketing campaign, right? And then they ramped it up. The Blitz campaign was here. And then this is when they theatrically opened. And so you see that we really didn't have downloads until you opened it. And so part of the message here is, as an industry, be careful how early you start marketing, because one of the things the industry has been able to do for a long time, and it's somewhat a necessary evil, but at the same time it's creating a lot of the problem that we've got, is you create demand with no ability to satisfy it, right? The marketing campaign will say, coming next month, right? And the pirates go, hey, I got it right now, right? Why wait, right? If I create demand right now, I can satisfy it right now. And so this is about tightening that marketing and saying, long lead marketing, you've got to be really careful with, because you're creating demand outside of the space when you can respond to it. This is tracking UGC sites. UGC sites are user-generated content sites, what they're known as, like a YouTube or a Mega Video or Dailymotion, a bunch of them like that. So these are sites on the web you just go to with your browser, click, it starts streaming to you, right? And so this chart is showing, the blue line is how many clips were added per day to the top 10 sites out there. And this red line was how many clips did the legal team get down every day, right? So you see it's kind of this, I'm putting them up and you're taking them down. Well, theoretically, that number available should be 0, right? But it's never 0, because the folks putting them up are faster and more agile than the people trying to take them down, right? And so you wind up with this gap, and you say, okay, on average, there was about 50 copies of this particular content up there on any given day. So even though you got 1,000 down, there's still 50 left, right? And those 50 were then watched over 450,000 times over just a few weeks, right? Now the big question is 450,000 a lot, right? Because again, I'm saying piracy, it is never going to be zero, right? The question is, how is it relative to the business? And when do you need to worry about it in terms of a fundamental competitor or not? This happened to be for a major TV show on ABC that had 21 million viewers US, right? So 21 million domestic viewers compared to 450,000, not a big problem, right? But again, that's, again, putting this in relative sense. So part of the answer is, you know what? If it costs me $3 million a year to do that red line right there, I got an army of lawyers, and I got a process, and I got this. And at the end of the day, probably there's, you know, if I had 50 or 250 clips out there on a given day, this number would probably still be 450, right? So the answer to the business is, maybe you shouldn't be spending all that money on that lawyer activity, right? Save it. Put it somewhere else. We got a lot of places to spend it, right? But that's not a good use of your money. Hard goods vary between the good stuff and the bad stuff. Anybody spot the real one up here? Oh, come on. No guesses at all? I know they're hard to see and all that stuff, but it's that one. It's the one that people go, oh, really? That one didn't look as good. And that's the point, right? The pirates, a lot of times, they're not spending for the film. They don't spend money on getting the film like a studio does. You know, studio spent $150, $250 million making it. They spent zero making it so they can put money into packaging, right? So the pirates on the high end, their stuff a lot of times looks far better than anything we would ever do at home video. I mean, they've got fold-out packaging and they've got, you know, all this stuff on it. They're highly motivated. This is a big, big, big business. This happens to be a raid that the MPA did in, I don't know, one of the Southeast Asian countries. You go in that door there, and it's a factory, but it's not a DVD factory. It's like an automotive factory, jeans, something, but nothing out of place, right? A legitimate company. But if you go over to the electrical panel, right, you can go through the live electrical panel, and on the other side is a complete DVD factory, right? And so they build the DVD factory first, and then they build a real wall and split the factory floor in half. And then they build another factory as purely just a dummy operation. But I mean, it's really running. It's doing real work. It's just that they don't generally know really what's going on over here. This happens to be a burner lab, so it gives you a sense, you know, that was replication before, this is burning. Gives you a sense, you know, I got a lot of capacity there, right? I can really crank out a lot of burned DVDs a day. So that's all foundational stuff, right? It's really just about, do you know what you know, right? On the advanced side, let's talk a little bit about that, better business decisions. So I'm going to use this kind of chart a couple times. So what I'm doing over here is I'm doing quality of the content, the pirated content. So DVD, that's like perfect. And this is like unwatchable, right? So that one of Wally I showed you is down here in CD. And so this is saying, and here's our timeline, right? So here's our theatrical release, and then we go for a little while. And then there's some gap in the middle, and then there's DVD Street, and we can work backwards from that, right? And whether this is a 120-day window or 90-day window or whatever, doesn't really matter. Those two things are a little bit independent. And so a worst case is saying something got out at basically DVD quality right at theatrical Street, just like I showed you with that Tron example, right? And it doesn't really have to get much better, but way down here, the pirates get their hands on the full retail DVD, and then they have all the bonus, and they have everything else, and they can make the full thing if they want to, right? So it gets a little bit better right there. This orange line is saying, you know, BC quality cam, not great, but pretty good. And then it got better. Let's just say that you decided to do a Russian retail DVD, which in the space we call an R5, because it's region 5. So, of course, if you put that into Russia, it gets ripped, and then it becomes available, because they're going to take audio from all your theatrical markets and stripe it on there. right? So yeah, they'll have a perfect Russian version, but they'll also have all the other ones. This is low average cams, no Russian retail DVD, and then here's actually, best case, right? You notice it's not a cam, it's just a crappy cam, and that's the only thing that's out there, and then the DVD gets compromised still 1 week ahead, right? So the difference between those, just on a medium-sized film, is about 80%, $66 million on a single film, right? So this is why, from a business standpoint, this stuff's so important, because it's saying piracy is inevitable. Yes, that's true, but the fact that we can move the needle so far is all about why this is important, right, from a business standpoint. All right. So if I take that and then I combine that with some of my data, this happens to be, again, just saying early retail DVD. Let's just take a different studio release of a major film. So here's some cams. They decided to put a Russian DVD out 4 weeks into the theatrical run. Right? So again, 4 of the current studios do this pretty often. Three do it almost every single film. So Fox does it almost every film. NBCU does it every film, and Sony does it absolutely every film. And so if you're in the scene, you just say, well, I'm not going to worry about the cams. I'm just going to wait for that R5 to come along because it's going to be perfect. Right? And that's what the world does, is they just wait for this one. And so you see that half of the total downloads, 49%, were that Russian DVD. If I take my little revenue calculator and say that's the difference between a really good version and a lesser version, the cam was still the cam and the DVD rip is still the DVD rip, then I say, well, what's the difference in terms of revenue, right? What's the real business situation here, you say? Because I've been through this conversation multiple times with the home video executives, and they say, but we're growing Russia, and it's, we think by putting it out early, we can effectively compete with piracy. And you say, okay, well, total of all piracy on this title, 38.9 to the mature markets. Piracy without the R532. So that little delta right there is $6.9 million. By the way, how much did you make in terms of incremental bump by going early in Russia? Oh, we made an extra $1 million. Right? Okay. Pretty simple math here, right? You lost 6.9 to the markets you have, right? So that's mostly to the US, but probably the UK, France, Spain, and you made an extra $1 million in Russia. So you lost 5 by doing that, right? Every single film, you lose $5 million. Not the right way to do it. When Russia comes up and becomes a major, major market, then maybe it's the time to do it, but it's not the time, right? You're building a market, and one of these days you're going to have Russia, and you will no longer have the US, you'll no longer have UK, right? You're just feeding this piracy machine. Okay, so likewise, common issue with movie distribution. This is the Ukraine issue, right? Decisions regarding emerging markets, build up a market. Example, going early in Russia, Ukraine, right? You want to build it. As a theatrical executive, you want to build that market, theoretically, and you want to be responsive. But if you look at how much revenue we have in other markets, right? So this is one of the major studios, Break. So 42% of their global theatrical revenue comes from the US, right? 42% is sitting here, and 54%, over half of their global home entertainment is coming from here. Russia, 4% of their total theatrical, right? I don't care what the CAGR is, there ain't enough CAGR to get you to where it's worth chasing that market at the moment, right? And by the way, this is percent, right? Not 1%, 0.1%, right? Mexico, 3%, 1%, Ukraine, 0.2% theatrical, 0 home entertainment, right? So it's pretty amazing when you start comparing this and you just go, why are we making these kind of business decisions when you've got such disparity, right? It's not close, but they do, and you'd say, well, why would these things happen? Because in some cases, a lot of these decisions are made at the local level. So to the Russian guy or Ukraine guy, it looks really good because he's rewarded on the performance of his market, not on the non-performance of the global, right? And that's kind of how this stuff happens. Disbelief in piracy tracking. Again, I've got a lot of data. The other one that's really pretty strong is sales guys like bird in the hand, right? I know I got $1 million of Russian rubles in my hand. You're telling me I lost 6, but I can't hardly feel it. Okay, maybe you couldn't feel it a couple years ago, but today you can probably start to feel it because your home video is really, really off. And so one of the ways that we kind of track things was just saying, these are a bunch of films from, for example, non-Disney studios at the time. And these are 3 films from Disney. And so just that difference in terms of what's the average for the non-Disney industry. And I'll take Warner off the table. Warner tended to behave a lot more like Disney. But if you said Fox, Sony, and NBCU, if you take those 3 studios and kind of say those studios tend to window very, very similarly, and you say that, let's average that behavior and the impact of that behavior against these 3 films, you wind up saying, well, we should have lowered piracy's impact to these 3 films by about $44 million. Now let's go to the business insight side. So this gets a little more interesting to me. So I'm going to show you some data from a company called Vobile. They're tracking this user-generated content stuff like YouTube and whatever. And in working with them, we have a lot of things that become kind of interesting in the space. So what I'm showing you here is a red line that is the line of consumption. So these are views of content that you, so I think this was Disney content. So, but when I say you, let's just say you work for Disney. So it's you created the content and you chose where to post it, right? So you virally posted it. And then marketing content that you created. So in this case, it's still marketing clips that you created, but you put out in the space and people came and picked it up from where you put it and put it where they wanted to put it, right? So they virally posted it. And you notice that the blue line starts low, right? But the blue line exceeds the red line over there, right? So it says they know where to put it to get more views than you do, right? But if we said, boy, what about the content? You notice it comes out after theatrical because these are people that are cutting their own marketing clips from those pirate versions, right? So they're cutting their own favorite clip of the movie. It's not your marketing, it's their marketing, right? Their version of your, and you notice it comes out slow, but then it exceeds both, right? So it says they know how to put more eyeballs on better content than you do. And in today's viral and kind of open, somewhat transparent internet world, you can begin to get this insight. And why that becomes really important is the fact that you got home entertainment windows still coming down here, right? So you ought to pay attention to where they're putting it and what they're putting out there because that probably hits home with your core customers better than whatever your marketing group is working on. Now I'm going to take you to kind of that question about, pirates are always pirates, right? So that's not really true because people don't really move from good old loyal customer to bad old pirate, right? In fact, people are really in the middle for a long time. So what this shows is we did 3 studies, 05, 07, 09, pretty big industry studies, and this is pure consumer. So we had 83% people that were purely just buying stuff, right? So those are your loyal customers. Dual consumers, people that said, yes, I buy stuff, and I also consume via non-monetized means, right? Monetized, non-monetized. I'm doing both, 15%. Pure pirate, 2%. Only 2% of the people are pure pirates. They're living over in, I don't buy anything, right? I don't pay for anything. By 07, you see this had grown from 15% to 25% dual, and in 09 we had 40% over here. In 07 we did very deep data gathering, and so we had light pirates, medium pirates, and heavy pirates. These folks did less than 5 titles a year, so that's pretty small. We did between 5 and 31 titles a year, and these did greater than 31. These people paid for 6 times more than they consumed for free, right? These people did 2 to 1, 2 times more paid, 1, and these people were twice as many non-monetized, right? But what's really important is to understand that when I then take that dual consumers, those folks were responsible for $6 billion of real revenue to our industry. When if you add it up, they were only responsible for about $4 billion in non-monetized, saying This is content they would have converted to had they not had some other means to acquire the content. And so what this ultimately means is, and again, when you really drill into this, some of your best customers are the biggest pirates. Some of the biggest pirates are your very best customers. Right? They're the people that love film. Right? They just love film. They just want sometimes it earlier, or they want it on a different platform, and they want it for a different price point. But ultimately, if you really have these kind of ideas that I'm going to go throw all those bad pirates in jail, you're not going to have a whole bunch of customers left, right? They are the same people, right? So people in here downloaded music, right? Anybody still download, any downloaders and purchasers, maybe? Anybody in the duel? See, I see kind of one, maybe. I'm a dueler, right? In fact, a lot of people are duelers, right? And that's really the point is it's a case where you kind of sit in this middle, right? Yeah, I download stuff and I kind of sample it and then I get my iTunes account and I got this and I go, once in a while I buy stuff. And you go, yep, when you start putting that together, you go, absolutely. We need to understand this because as an industry, a lot of times we're taking the wrong approach. And what that really means is that I've got people that monetize, and I've got these non-monetized. And non-monetized fall into two camps. People that we know through research that say, my motivation is not about free. My motivation is about timing, platform, other stuff. It might be price point, right? But it doesn't get down, I'm willing to pay, I'm just not willing to pay full ride retail, right? And so the way to convert these is to go, okay, I can convert these folks with pay business models because these people tell me they're willing to pay. In fact, if they're telling me they're a dual consumer, I know they already pay, right? There isn't any hypothetical, would you go to Walmart and buy it? Yeah, I went to Walmart 10 times in the last year and I bought other stuff. I just wouldn't want to buy that, right? Well, why wouldn't you want to buy that? Well, because it was this, that, or that, right? There's also, in today's world, indirect pay models like ad-sponsored and other stuff. So there's a lot of ways to have things be free to a consumer without actually being free from an industry. Here's the last point I want to make, which is a little bit of insight that we discovered as we were kind of working through things. So within Disney, there were 3 films that were called out about a year ago as being kind of bitter disappointments. And they were these 3 films: Confessions of a Shopaholic, Surrogates, and Race to Witch Mountain. And all the press, and again, this had to do with Dick Cook's leaving and why he was being replaced, and non-performance, and these 3 films were really utter failures financially. And I said, in the piracy world, they were failures. These things were hits, right? It wasn't like no one wanted to download Shopaholic, regardless, right? There are those films out there. Shopaholic was hammered all over the world, right? So you go, people wanted this movie. They just didn't want to pay for it, right? They wanted it in a different timing, different quality, different platform, right? And so we started to have this idea, and I said, is there a correlation between piracy and profitability? Because logically, there has to be, right? Everything I've argued to this point says there absolutely has to be. Now let's actually tie it out tangibly. So one of the things we started working on was getting real data from some of the studios on how did a film actually perform, right? Net profitability, which is net revenue minus production cost and M&A, right? So how much did I get to keep at the end of the day? And was it a loser? Was it marginally profitable? Or was it very profitable? And you see those 3 films kind of went that way. So economically, these were not good, right? On the other hand, if you said, boy, how much piracy consumption did they have, right? And up on a scale there, low to high, you see that Shopaholic up there just got hammered, right? Lots of downloading. And so here's a whole bunch of other films. Anybody take a guess at what that is out there? Yeah, Avatar, right? The thing kicked ass, right? We know it did. But at the same time, you know what? There was a lot of downloads, right? So financially, it still did pretty well. Could have done better, right? But it did financially quite well. But there's a lot of other films that didn't do so well. So if this is kind of how they mapped, right? We took a whole bunch of them. And then you say, there's some logical groupings here. They group kind of into these 3 buckets, right? These films out here tend to be A titles, right? Must see, watch, own. And those are films that if I looked at the financial performance, they sit in the very profitable. It means that the current methodology and windowing strategies actually work. Right? It says people still, today, I can make a big film. We call them blockbusters, but you know what? Sometimes blockbusters are down here. What we think is a blockbuster, right? But most of the blockbusters that we go to market with are sitting up there. And it says the theatrical and the windowing and the home entertainment still work. Right? The other message is maybe these are the ones you don't screw around with. Right? So when Disney, I was still at Disney when we announced that we were going to go early with Alice, right, in Europe. We were going to shorten the window radically, and we were going to do these things, and it created a huge fervor in the industry. But Alice sits out here. Right? There's these other films, interestingly enough, that sit in this middle ground where they're kind of marginally profitable or kind of go right to the edge of, I don't know if that was any good or not. But they over-index in terms of piracy, meaning this slant here says, you know what? If they have much more piracy, they tend to get drawn that way economically, which means that they don't make as much money, right? A lot of piracy means they don't make as much money. There's a direct correlation. There's something going on right there. And then there's these films you go, don't make any more of those, right? That was like the question on archiving. Which should I archive? Only archive the hits, right? I mean, that was our strat planners came up with that once. Only make hit movies from now on, right? Just only hits and you'll be okay. So figure out a way to not do these anymore. That would be good. But these here, interestingly enough, are the ones that once you get down to motivations, one of the things is if you said, what are the films that people are consuming a lot of, like through Netflix streaming? These over here. Right? These are the films that don't necessarily fit into our theatrical life, our mainstream primetime life, but I still have demand for. And so if the Pirates or some other channel can begin to give me the ability to see it in a window and on a platform that fits my life, I will consume it. Right? And I'll spend money to do it. These are the ones that's my Friday date night, and this is like Thursday night when I can't sleep. Right? But they're still watching it. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense on a way to think about this piracy stuff, where you can kind of take this foundational stuff, advanced and insight, and put it together.